My first post on Let's Not Meet, and this happened over a year ago. Our oldest son Caden was 3 at the time, and our youngest son Connor was about 5 months old. Still gives me the chills, and still makes me uncomfortable even walking by it. It was a January evening in Pennsylvania. It was dark outside with a couple inches of snow on the ground. We had just finished eating dinner, and I planned on giving our little one a bath. My husband drives a truck for work, so he isn't home often. It's me and my boys during the week. Caden was playing in the toy room that has a door leading to the side deck. A little detail, we have no light sensor on that porch light on the whole side of our house. At this time, we didn't use that deck at all, and only really used it to grill during the summer months. It's not close to the sidewalk or the next street over. Anyway, Caden was playing in the toy room, waiting for his turn to take a bath, while I brought Connor into the bathroom. We were just about done with his bath when I heard Caden's little feet running towards the bathroom. He stands in the doorway and says, "Mommy, there's a man looking in the side door. I think it's a mailman." My heart skipped a beat because 1. No mailman is coming at 7 p.m. 2. The side door, as he called it, was never used, especially not in the winter. 3. I didn't hear anyone knock. I began to sketch myself out more by thinking how there is no light on the deck, and this person would have to walk through the yard in the snow, walk back the upstairs of the deck, and go to the door when the front porch light was on and adjacent to the shoveled sidewalk. I took Connor out of the bath, put him in a towel in his little chair, and told Caden to sit with his brother and not to come out until I said it was okay. He was very confused but listened, just kept asking me what was wrong. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, had 911 ready to call, and got my mama bear face on. When I walked to the sliding glass door, I shined a flashlight on my phone through the window of the door at a distance while walking up to it, hopefully to scare anyone away. The worst thought with this as a mother is when I reached the handle I realized it was unlocked. Someone could have walked right in. I flung the door open and shined my light, held up the knife and yelled, "Hey!" in the most threatening voice a 5'4", 120-pound woman could make. There were footprints in the snow up to the deck stairs and back down going into the field in the woods behind our house. I slammed the door, thoroughly freaked out, and locked it. I called the police and waited for them in the bathroom with my boys. While I was in there, I asked Caden, "Do we know who the man was?" He said, "No, but he smiled and waved at me for a long time. Freaking haunts me still." I asked him what he was wearing. He told me that he had a hat that looked like a mailman's, and he wasn't wearing a coat. That's all I got out of him. The police officers came and searched my property with flashlights before coming inside. He asked me and Caden questions, and then informed me that he not only saw footprints leading up the side of the deck, but to the outside door of our basement and kitchen window on the other side of the house as well. He suggested that we have someone come stay with us for the night, and they will continue to follow the footprints that were left in the snow back to the field and wood line. My father-in-law slept on the couch that night with his gun, being the closest relative to our house. My mother was a nervous wreck, and I got very little sleep that night, and never heard back from the police. Caden still mentions it from time to time randomly, and we got blackout curtains for that door. I still very much like to get better locks, just to be safe. My husband and my father think it might have been a man who saw me home alone while passing and wanted to hopefully sneak a peek. But why just stand there and watch my child and go around the whole back of the house, not by the front door or street? Hope to never see this creep's face, and I hope he never smiles or waves at my child again. Last night, a friend of mine and I were walking home in my city. We were cutting from one of the main roads to another main road, but we were using the neighborhood between those two roads as a cut-through. We rounded a super sharp corner and slammed on the brakes because a dude was literally just standing there. He comes running to the car, and it literally looked like a scene from a horror movie. He had blood on his t-shirt, and his jaw was hanging. I don't even know if he asked, but the next thing I remember He's in the back seat while we're hauling ass to the hospital, which just happens to be right next to my friend's apartment complex. On the way, he tried his best to explain what happened, but all I was able to make out was that he abandoned his car somewhere and that he had been shot in the face. We took him to the hospital, but we weren't able to go in or anything because of COVID-19, so I'm unsure of his current condition. This might not be a super creepy encounter, but it was insane, and I would never think that anything like that would happen. My adrenaline is still pumping 12 hours later. Update. Turns out that he had been buying weed from someone and got shot in the face by the person that also tried to rob him. Don't know if he got charged or if anyone else did, but he was a victim and was pretty chill for some dude who just got shot in the face. About 2 years ago, I used to work part-time at a popular pizza chain as a delivery driver. I had a full-time job during the day, so the shift at the pizza place would be from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. I enjoyed the job for the fact that I made good money and it was easy, but I hated working at night because it was dangerous. One night we got a call 30 minutes before closing, and it was for delivery in the worst part of town. I was stuck taking the order, since the manager had sent the other drivers home early because it was a slow night. I hurriedly headed out to deliver the pizza. About 20 minutes later, my GPS said that I had arrived. I couldn't read the house numbers because it was pitch dark and none of the houses had the porch light on. As safety, I called the customer to ask if they could turn on their light. He didn't answer until the 6th rang. He tells me that his house has 2 trash bins next to the curb and that the light was broken so he couldn't turn it on. I started walking through the front yard to the front door when I see a man staring at me through the window. I yelled out hello to him, but no reaction. He doesn't even move or open the door. I'm getting goosebumps now, and I decide to turn around to go back to my car. I call the customer again to come get his pizza from my car. He tells me in a slow, creepy voice to ignore his roommate. He said that the door is unlocked and if I could bring the pizza down to the basement because he rents the bottom floor. As I'm on the phone, I can make a small light out from the window. The man that was staring at me earlier was on the phone talking to me. I hung up and took off. By the time I got back to the restaurant, phones were turned over. Any complaints would have to wait till the next day. I'm not delivering to any basements, and I'm now taking your pizza home for dinner. Okay, so this just happened this morning, and my housemates and I are still pretty freaked out, so I thought I would share. This morning at 5 a.m., I was woken up when my roommate called out my name and told me quietly, "Oh my god, there's someone at the window." It was pitch black, so I assumed that she was seeing a weird shadow or something. But when I turned to face the window, I could see a clear outline of a male figure through the blinds, which we keep slanted open so the sunlight wakes us up in the morning. He was standing maybe a foot away from the window and was directly facing us. For some context, our room is on the ground floor and has one of those large windows that has Bundy bars. They call them this because Ted Bundy, who killed 2 women at an FSU sorority house after climbing through the window, and therefore have bars on the ground floor for bedroom windows in our sorority house. Our room was also on the side of the house, so it's not like someone could have just wandered there. To get to our bedroom window, you have to go around the walled-off patio and a thicket of vines and foliage, so you'd have to put some work into getting back there, which makes you think whatever this guy was doing was very deliberate and planned. I froze. I didn't know what to do. It was too dark to take a picture or make out any details that could identify the person, so I just kind of sat on my bed trying to process what was going on. It seemed like he was looking through the window into our room, but after a few seconds of watching him, my roommate noticed that he was holding a flashlight. To me, it looked like he was looking at the Bundy bars and where they met the wall to see how secure they were. The bars could be opened from the inside. Coincidentally, we just replaced them last semester, which is even scarier. After a few minutes, the guy went away. We told our house mom immediately and she called the police. Our house has security cameras at every entrance, and apparently it caught footage of him pacing back and forth. So he was there for a while. I'm still pretty shaken up, especially when I think about what his intentions were, and the times that this may have happened while we were still sleeping and had no idea. I'm worried that he'll return, especially since we're a sorority house that's a home to 24 young women. I just got back from a nighttime dog walk, and I'm a little sketched out. Me and my partner just recently got an 8-month-old border collie pup. We lived in a really safe, pretty small European city in a nice, quiet suburb area. I have not lived here long, and I'm not from this country, but the most disturbing events I've witnessed in this area are a few 16-year-olds having a party on a Friday night. From what I've been told, crime rates are very, very low here. There's a gravel trail that runs between a bunch of backyards, which is lined by trees, and it's completely dark at night. My partner and I have walked down this path at night a couple of times, and we've only ever saw one other person, another dog walker, with a bright head torch. There are a couple of small trails that cut across the gravel paths, one which leads up a small hill to our street. Tonight I was out walking my dog on my own. I had a glass of wine with dinner, and I guess I was feeling pretty ballsy. I decided to walk down one of the small trails, which cuts across the gravel path. It was about 8:30 p.m., although by this point, it was pretty pitch black. Despite feeling fairly confident about my choices, I was wondering if it was really such a good idea to cut across the dark paths for the sake of saving 5 minutes. I definitely wouldn't risk it in my home city. I decided to keep going, in hopes that my dog would attack the shit out of any creepy weirdos hiding in the darkness. As we walk down the trail, I see something glinting in the ditch to the left. As we get closer, it appears to be a silver metallic gym ball. I thought about how out of place this looked. No one ever dumps rubbish here, but I shrug it off and keep walking. All of a sudden, my pup lays down on her belly and refuses to move while staring straight ahead at the main gravel trail. If you've ever spent time with a border collie, you'll know the crouch I'm talking about. Now, my pup has recently taken to doing this whenever she sees either a person or an animal up ahead. We've been trying to stop her from lunging at passers and other dogs by getting her to lay down and wait until they've passed. She has taken to do this automatically without us commanding her. When it's a dog, she'll generally lay on her belly and try to commando roll towards them because she wants to say hello. When it's a person, she usually just lays there and waits. For a second, I think she's having to lay down in the grass. Then I realize that she won't move, even when I give her a tug on the leash. She's just staring straight ahead, like she does when she sees someone in the distance. I stop for a while and try to scan the path ahead. It's too dark to make out anything. We sometimes get deer wandering around here, but their eyes usually glint in the dark. I don't see anything or hear anything at all, just blackness and silence. I started to get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something told me to turn around and get the heck out of there as fast as I could. My dog quickly followed me, all the while looking back at whatever or whoever she was staring at. Usually she stops every few seconds to sniff something, but this time she hot-tailed it out of there. Was it just the wind? An animal? A creepy weirdo? I'm not 100% sure, but I can't help the feeling that my dog just saved me from a potentially sketchy situation. What do you think? When I was 10, my 2 older brothers and I drove home from a family friend's birthday party at night. Our parents were still at the party. My oldest brother, Michael, who was 17, dropped me and my other brother, Eric, 15, off to go inside so we didn't have to wait for him to park the car. As soon as Eric and I got inside our pitch black house, I heard a man grunt. We both went quiet. I was confused at how our dad got home before us since we had left him at the party. So I shouted out, "Dad?" Eric immediately looked down at me with the most terrified face I had ever seen and says, "You heard that too?" Eric played football and was relatively buff and a tougher guy, especially to my tiny 10-year-old self. I naturally relied on both of my older brothers to protect me, so seeing him absolutely frightened freaked me out big time. If he's scared, then it must be bad. We stared at each other for a moment before screaming and running out of the house without another word. We ran back outside and got into the car, where Michael still was, and told him what happened. "I'm sure it was nothing," he says. "Probably just something falling." He didn't really believe us. It definitely sounded like a voice to me and Eric. We lived in a very calm suburb, and all the neighbors were old. The road was not a main road, and the only other people that needed to drive through the neighborhood were residents. It definitely wasn't a road people who didn't live here drove through. Just as Michael tried to calm us down, a random car pulled up beside us, motioning us to roll down our windows. It was a man driving with two women who asked us where a well-known highway was. They had a thick, strange accent that sounded fake. Michael explained to them how to get to the highway. The strangers were completely confused and didn't seem to understand and kept asking for clarification. After they finally drove off, Michael said, "Well, that was weird. It's really hard to miss the highway, especially where they were coming from. Who doesn't know that highway anyway?" Now, all three of us began to panic. We realized that they were a distraction to stall us, to allow whoever was in the house to get out. The directions were simple. It should not have taken 5 minutes for them to understand. Also, this wasn't a place for people to get lost in. Of course, we called our parents, but they dismissed us. People get lost all the time, and we were just hearing things. They said that they'll be home from the party in a couple hours. So after a while, the three of us decided to go inside. My brothers grabbed their baseball bats, and I used the folded up mic stand. We slowly walked around the house, looking everywhere, under beds, in closets, and checking all of the doors. Nothing seemed to be out of place, and all the doors were locked, though I'm not sure if we checked the windows. Eventually we calmed down. When our parents got home, they thought we were just being dramatic. There's no way someone was in our house, and at least we're all safe now. So we just went to bed and never spoke about it again. Okay, so this just happened. It's 12 a.m. Out in our backyard, we saw a few flashlights looking around our ponds. It was still for a while. Then they started moving towards our house. I went to message my sister about this, and when I looked up, the lights were gone. I don't think it could have been a normal person looking for their dog or something. They would have no reason to shut off their lights as soon as they got close to our house. My dad went out with a flashlight, and I hope he scared them off. In the morning, we were going to try to see if we saw any footprints, but since it rained heavily today, the ground is very muddy. Update. Sorry for the delay. I've had my family coming up and was busy with them, but we checked around the backyard and the ponds, and we found nothing. Not a single footprint, which is weird because I swear that's where the lights were, and it was somewhat muddy. We're pretty confused, but the following night we had no problems. Didn't see the light again. I guess whoever it was got scared off by my dad. Finding no footprints is disconcerting though, but I don't know. I'll post an update if we see any activity like this again. Update, later that night. I just saw the lights again. This time it was 10:30. It was a little fainter this time, but it was more erratic. After looking at it for a few minutes, it went out. At this point, I'm not really sure what to believe it is. It disappeared as soon as I was getting my phone out to video it. I'll try to be faster next time. Okay, first let me say that I debated on posting this here because I may be overreacting about a few weird things that have happened in the last couple of weeks here in my house. But then I decided to go ahead and post it anyways and see what you all think about it. And please tell me if I'm overreacting. I won't be offended if anyone tells me that I'm being silly. First off, our house has a basement/crawl space that is only accessible from the outside through a door directly underneath the bedroom window and about 10 feet from the steps leading up to the back deck. It's a fairly large space, dirt floors and concrete walls, clean and plenty big enough for a grown man to stand up in. Until recently, it was half full of junk, most from our kitchen reno, like paint cans and equipment, and extra floor tiles and such, and had a padlock on it. We asked our yard guy to do some extra work that included cleaning it completely out, and when it was finally empty, we didn't bother putting the lock back on it. It had a sliding bolt that kept it closed, in addition with a little loop thingy that you put the padlock on, so we just slid the bolt and called it good. There was absolutely nothing in it, so there wasn't really a point of locking it. A couple weeks ago, my boyfriend was out on the back deck, emptying the recycling bin when he noticed the door was open. Someone would have had to open it. The sliding bolt was a bit rusty and wouldn't easily come open, and certainly wouldn't have opened on its own. We went to go check it out. Nobody there, still completely empty. He thinks, well, okay, someone was poking around and didn't find anything interesting, but he did tell me about it and reminded me to keep the doors locked when he wasn't home. A few days after that, I had the dog outside, and he ran straight to the door. He started sniffing and scratching at it, and I noticed that it was slightly open again. I opened it, went inside, and walked around. Nobody was there. Let me add that we have a lot of trees and wildlife on our property, including raccoons and groundhogs, in addition of tons of squirrels. We had one huge oak tree that overhangs the roof, covering the massive bedroom, so it's nothing unusual to hear squirrels and other animals on the roof with their little pattering feet and scratching sounds. Yesterday I was home alone, laying in bed, reading a book. The house was completely silent. Usually the dog would lay on the bed with me, but he was acting fidgety. He was pacing and just acting weird. I was hearing the usual late afternoon squirrels, or whatever was on the roof. But then I heard a noise that is clearly the crawlspace door creaking open. It's directly underneath the window to my right. So I stand up and creep over to the window. I crack the shades a teeny bit and peek out. I see a guy starting up the steps to my deck, just having exited the crawlspace. I immediately said fuck no, dropped the shades, and headed up the hall directly to the door he was heading to confront him. At the same moment, my dog was nuts, barking and beating me to the door, but he was nowhere in sight when I got there. I only saw him through the window for a second, and I only saw him from the back as he was heading up the steps. He was wearing a ball cap, so I couldn't even have said what color his hair was. I'm guessing my dog scared him away, but what the fuck was he doing on my porch in the broad daylight, with someone obviously home? If he hadn't planned on knocking on the door. And no one would knock on that door anyway. People come to the front and knock, not walk all the way around the back, in the trees in the backyard. I waited a few minutes, then got my pepper spray out of my purse and went to investigate. Sure enough, the crawlspace door was open again. No one was inside. When my boyfriend got home, he put a padlock on it. Then he got my gun out of the safe, where it's been for years, and assisted me keeping it under the mattress, on my side of the bed. I agreed to that after he loaded it with a rat shot, because I don't think I could shoot a human being, not even in self-defense. And a rat shot won't do much more than scare someone away with the noise from the gunshot. He was highly pissed at me that I went by myself to check out the basement, but I'm more angry than frightened. I don't know if I'm overreacting, that just because someone had been inside the basement a few times, I automatically assumed it was the man I saw who was responsible and meant harm. I'm fairly certain he did come out of there though, because I definitely heard the door open just seconds before I saw him on the steps. With it locked up now though, if someone had been routinely in and out, that will stop. Like I said, I don't know if I'm freaking out over nothing. I'm keeping my doors locked just in case. I think it's happening. Like, not right now, but I think the creep might be hanging around. It's little things, but it makes me sound crazy. I've ignored them a lot when I first moved in here, thinking that it was just because I'd been through a lot and I was living alone and pregnant, then with a baby. The nights I became sure was when I heard someone trying to get in the back gate. I called the police and they were literally there in 2 minutes. Whoever it was must have heard them because I heard them run off. I was so impressed with the police response and I felt good about that, but anyway. I was awake using my phone one night. Being it was the summer, the noisy heater wasn't running, and I didn't need a fan at that point. I could hear what sounded like someone was there, but like they approached the side of the house and walked away because I wasn't in that particular room. I went into the lounge room, which is made of like 75% creaky floorboards, and I felt like someone was there. And I tried to make it sound like I walked away to bed, and I crawled really silent like a cat, avoiding the creaky floorboards. I got to the window, which is covered by a curtain that's like a pull down, and I hadn't pulled it down fully. I approached it and looked out and saw a flash. I live on a pretty dark street, and the street lights a few doors down couldn't have emitted that at me, for lack of better words. I didn't call the police because I was a little inebriated and I was in absolute shock. But the thing is, there's been other things. I am sure I've heard someone tampering with my windows. I realized that when I sat up late with all the lights on, walking around, even though I listened out, nothing. But when I'm sitting around with my iPhone and laptop, no lights. It's not all the time, but occasionally I hear someone walking near the side of my house, and I'm pretty sure someone has tried to open the gate. The sound is unmistakable. I even purposely waited for the opportunities to compare the audible differences between footsteps on the pavement, out the front, at least 10 to 15 meters away, and when there was a closer noise. I'd listen to the way the activity sounded at the side of the property whenever tradespeople came. It used to be a transitional house, meaning a lot of people with problems lived there, before me, including drugs and violence. A handful of people have knocked on my door looking for previous tenants, up until about 12 months after I moved in. Apparently, one guy used to deal from the shed in the backyard. Maybe someone got out after being locked up for a while, and thought maybe he was still there. One of the last tenant's exes tried to kill her and the kids in the house. It has a colorful history. I have no doubts that someone's hanging around, whether it's lost druggies, a weirdo, robber. While it's not in the worst area I've ever lived, fairly tame, it's still not the best street because of some of the other housing commissions. I've also got a feeling that I might know who it is, but until I get footage, I'm not going to say. I've noticed every now and again strangest behaviors and started thinking about things I've heard, seen. I don't know. It wouldn't be too far-fetched. And if I die, I don't think it's my kid's dad. I checked that already, by means he couldn't fabricate. I think about the things that I see. The late nights, the sounds of the gate, the smoke. Anyways, the plan is to get some surveillance, because writing this shit down ain't helpful. I've already got our room set up, so no one can get in. I'm gonna put something small inside that can just record the nights, so it's hard to see, and hopefully put an end to this. I've gotten to the point where I'm actually scared, but also scared to do the surveillance thing. And that's probably the main reason I haven't done anything about cameras. I'm scared to know what's behind the window. Thing is, I think I'm just typing because when I put my phone down, I'm gonna go to sleep. And I don't know, the world is a damn scary place for a lone woman and little boy.
I'd been looking forward to Friday all weekend. It was Diane's 14th birthday, and we were going to have a slumber party at her house. Mama offered me a ride, but Diane only lived about half a mile from town, so I walked. Fact was, I liked walking. It gave me a chance to be alone with my imagination. I got to Diane's house about 5 in the afternoon. Casey had already been there a little while. Gail showed up about half an hour after I did. Diane's parents had planned on going to dinner and a movie, so we were going to be left to our own devices for a while. Not that we couldn't be trusted. I mean, we were pretty good girls as a rule, but we all knew that we had it in us to be bad. Whether we'd do anything our parents wouldn't approve of was yet to be seen, but personally, I liked the idea that we might. If we were going to do anything that might get us in trouble, though it was probably going to be something initiated by Casey. She had always been the instigator in our little group, the brave one, the one who would step across the line first and then coax us over. In fact, she had said that she was going to try to steal a bottle of vodka from her stepbrother's stash and bring it over for us to drink. Once Diane's parents had gone for the evening, though, Casey announced that the son of a bitch had drunk it all himself. There hadn't been anything for her to take. Frankly, I was relieved, but like everybody else, I acted disappointed. After Casey finished insulting her stepfather, though, she got that devious look on her face, the one that let us know there was something going on in that wicked little brain of hers. I asked her what she was thinking. She grinned and said, "Maybe I've got something better than vodka." "What could be better than vodka?" Gail asked, trying to sound tough. She was the most timid of our little foursome. "This," Casey said. Then she reached in her backpack and pulled out a book. It was an old-looking book, too. Very old. The cover was dark and dirty, and its edges were frayed. The title was hard to read, but I finally made it out. It said, "Incantations and Their Defenses." We all looked between Casey and the book, and Casey was looking between the three of us, still wearing that devious grin. "A book?" Gail queried. "Really?" "I'm sorry," Diane said. "But are you really planning on reading us a ghost story or something?" Gail added, "Don't you think we're a little old for ghost stories?" "I don't think you're ever too old for ghost stories," Casey said with that familiar edge in her voice. "But this isn't a storybook." "What is it then?" Diane asked. "It's got spells in it," Casey replied. "Spells and incantations." "You mean like witchcraft?" Diane asked. Casey sort of shrugged, as if not wanting to be bothered with labels. I don't think it's a very good idea," Gail said. "I mean, that's devil worship kind of stuff." "Good Lord, Gail," Casey said. "Get a hold of yourself before you faint or something. It's just a book. But it's from 1791. 1791? I asked. Casey opened it to the title page and showed me. Sure enough, it had been published in New York City in 1791. "Where'd you get this?" "My stepfather's library." "You stole it?" Gail asked. "Borrowed is the word I believe you're looking for," Casey said. "As retribution for the old bastard drinking up all his vodka." We all laughed a little, but then Gail asked, "Well, what do you mean to do with it?" "Not me," Casey replied. "Us." "Okay then," Diane said. "What are we gonna do with it?" "I thought you'd never ask," Casey said. Then she turned on Diane's bedside lamp to fight off the gathering darkness. I took the liberty to go through it ahead of time, just to see if there was anything interesting. We all waited, and finally I prompted her. And I found this here," Casey said, then opened the book to a marked page and laid it on the bed. We all gathered around so we could see. The thing that struck me the most was the smell coming from the book. It was dank and moldy. It smelled of something very old that didn't want to be bothered, like Granny's storm cellar used to smell when we'd sneak off in it. "What's this?" Diane asked. The title at the top of the page read Summons of Corson, and it was followed by what appeared to be a list of instructions, all written in a very legible hand. "Who is Corson?" Gail asked. "Not who, so much as what," Casey replied, her grin returning. "Corson is a demon, apparently." "I knew it," Gail said, sounding more than a little scared. "It's devil worship." "Calm yourself, Gail," Casey teased. "You're not the Virgin Mary. And besides, it's not devil worship. It's a demon." "I don't like demons much neither," Casey rolled her eyes. "Corson is one of the 4 kings that have power over the 72 demons constrained by King Solomon." Diane said, reading from her phone. And it says he's not to be conjured except on great occasions. This is a great occasion, Casey said to Diane. It's your birthday. I'm not worried about who or what Corson is, I said. I'm more worried about this book. As old as it is, it's probably pretty valuable. I don't think it's a very good idea for us to have it here. What if something happens to it? I don't want to be responsible. Of course, that led us into an all-out debate about the merits of us having the book, which Casey quickly turned into a referendum on our bravery. And sure enough, just like always, before long she had convinced us that we were just being silly, and that we were obligated to see things her way. It was all nonsense anyway. There was no reason at all for us to not go through the motions of summoning up Corson, just for fun, of course. And also, just like always, Gail didn't so much agree as she found herself overwhelmed by the momentum of the group. The book directed us to sit around a lit candle and to pour a line of salt around us, for our own protection. Diane went and got the salt from the kitchen and drew a large circle on her bedroom floor. Casey took a large candle from Diane's dresser, one that was about a foot in diameter and had 3 separate wicks, and set it in the middle of the circle. We all took our places in the circle, and I lit the candle. All 3 wicks. I don't think it's a good idea, Gail half-whined. Really, guys, let's not do this. By then, our motivation was probably mostly about scaring Gail. It was clear she was very uncomfortable with what was going on. I'm not sure why we found it so entertaining to make her uncomfortable, but we did. I admit that I wasn't very nice, but that's how it was. Casey set the book next to the candle so we could all see it. And then she took the first step as listed in the instructions. She called upon Satan to hear our plea. The lamp on Diane's nightstand sort of flickered. Just a little, but it got our attention. That's enough, Gail demanded. This is foolish. We're just asking for trouble. The book says we all have to be engaged, Casey scolded. Stop your whining and concentrate. Diane sort of laughed, but I couldn't tell for sure if she was making fun of Gail or if she was trying to convince herself that she was okay. As for me, I watched the lamp. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, it stayed steady. We have to all read the incantation, Gail said, looking mostly at Gail. Or it won't work. Gail said, I don't want it to work. I swear, Gail, Casey scolded. You have to be the biggest baby I know. I don't hear anyone else complaining. Gail looked down at her lap and sort of fussed with her fingers. She looked so small all of a sudden. There in the flickering candlelight, trying to be brave but not succeeding. Just then, a low growl came from Diane's bedroom door. I won't lie, it scared the shit out of me. I whirled around and was more than a little relieved to find Diane's dog, Buster, standing in the doorway. We were all relieved, I could tell. It's just a dog, Casey hissed. Are we gonna do this or not? The breeze had picked up and was blowing through Diane's open window and licking all the flames on the candle. A little voice in my head said to tell Casey that no, we weren't gonna do this. It was foolish, and she was starting to sound a little too enthusiastic about it for me to feel comfortable with. I didn't say that, though. Neither did Gail or Diane. We all just sat there, as though Casey truly did have some sort of power over us. I saw a tear trace down Gail's cheek. This was wrong. We should have quit it right then, but we didn't. Like I was saying, Casey finally said, we all have to read the incantation 3 times. She looked around the circle at each of us as if to drive the point home, and then she looked back to the book and started to read. Like the lemmings we apparently were, we read right along with her. Fire est bon an enwamb, die drustum morum biforen kom, en brist o kolen seperta faren, lot korsen arebe farestin beren. We all read slowly, phonetically, and after the first time, though, the wind picked up and blew out one of the wicks. We kept going, though, faster than the first time, like a rock starting to gather speed rolling down a hill. After the second time, though, the lamp flickered again, and then went out. I don't know why we didn't stop then, why I didn't get out of the circle, but I kept on reading with everybody else. The third time, though, we had sort of found a rhythm, like a chant, and I could feel tingling all over my back as we spoke the words, like tiny fingers were moving across my skin in waves. No sooner than we'd finished reading, the wind stopped blowing altogether. Everything became still and quiet. Buster, who'd been standing in Diane's bedroom door this entire time, let out with a little whimper and scampered away. I could hear his paws clacking as he descended the staircase to the first floor. I didn't feel right. This situation didn't feel right. I couldn't have said what it was, but something was wrong. Something was really wrong. Just then, Buster started barking wildly, like maybe there was an intruder in the house or something. Then I thought I heard another little whimper, and Buster stopped barking. By then, I was so scared I could hardly breathe. I didn't know what to do. "You bunch of babies," Casey said, and then she stood up. "Where are you going?" Gail blurted out. "You can't leave the circle. You'll destroy the protection." "What protection?" Casey laughed. "It's a circle of salt." No sooner than she'd stepped across the line, Diane's bedroom door slammed shut with such force I thought the hinges would break. All of us screamed. At least I think we all did. Maybe it was just me and Gail. Regardless, after she'd composed herself, and over Gail's protests, Casey started for the door. She said, "I told Tommy to come over if he could." Tommy was her boyfriend, her 16-year-old boyfriend. "It's probably just him and his friends messing with us." No, don't go," Gail protested, but it was too late. Casey opened the door and headed out of our sight. I looked at the other two, still sitting there in the circle of salt with me, and it was plain that they were every bit as scared as I was. Then there came a low, malevolent-sounding growl from the first floor. It wasn't loud, but we could all hear it, and it filled me to the top with fear. Not 2 seconds later, Casey reappeared in Diane's doorway, and she was white as a sheet. I don't think I'd ever seen such a look of terror on somebody's face, not even in a movie. I'm so sorry," Casey managed to choke out through her fear. I had no idea." Right then, there came a heavy footstep on the stairs, then another, and then another. Casey looked over her shoulder, tears forming in her eyes. And then, without saying another word, she sprinted across Diane's bedroom floor and went out the open window onto the roof of the front porch. She bounded across it, and without even hesitating, leapt from the roof to the ground. The footsteps from the staircase stopped, and then seemed to reverse course. We could hear them echo from downstairs, as though passing through the den. And then we heard the front door squeak open. I wanted to get up and look out the window, to discover what it was that had just apparently let itself out of the house, but fear had a grip on me. I couldn't make myself move. I didn't want to leave the circle. "What are we gonna do?" Gail whispered, laced with tears and fear. I only managed to shake my head slowly, and then she began reciting the Lord's Prayer, rocking back and forth as she spoke the words. I looked at Diane, She seemed as dumbfounded and as uncertain as I was about what to do. In the name of God, I kept thinking. What had we done? What had our silliness unleashed? It wasn't long, probably less than a minute after we'd heard the front door open. There came another sound wafting through the window. It was almost like a scream, but maybe mixed with laughter somehow. How odd. Had it been laughter, though, or something else? I couldn't tell for sure, but whatever it was, it didn't last long. Like Buster's barking, it just stopped. Like somebody had pushed a button and turned it off. "Call somebody," I said to Diane. She was the only one of the three of us who had a phone. "Call somebody. Call 911. She sort of froze and then looked towards her nightstand. "You left it over there?" I asked, exacerbated that she would do something so foolish. But then, of course, I realized it hadn't been foolish at all. I mean, it wasn't as though a reasonable mind would have concluded that a little interaction would work. Regardless, it was clear that she wasn't inclined to leave the circle, so I forced myself to do it. I grabbed the phone off the table and hurried back to my spot by the candle. "Here," I said, thrusting the phone towards her. She took it from me, and after looking at it for a few seconds, pressed at the screen. She looked back at me, fresh fear on her face. "What's wrong?" I asked. The battery. It's dead." Of course it would be dead, wouldn't it? "Where's your charger?" "Downstairs." No sooner than she'd spoken the word, we heard it. The heavy footsteps on the porch, then in the den, and finally to the staircase. My heart was racing so fast I could no longer feel the individual heartbeats. It was more like a constant hum in my chest. It didn't take long for the footsteps to reach the top of the stairs. Then they started down the hall, towards Diane's bedroom. Our eyes were all glued to the doorway. Our collective terror escalated with each new footfall. We were unable to move, just as we were unable to believe what appeared to be happening. I became aware that Gail had latched herself to my arm, squeezing so hard that it hurt. But I didn't care. All I cared about was whatever was walking down the hall towards us, and why we couldn't seem to move. It felt like it went on forever, the heavy footsteps moving even closer. There wasn't much light at all coming from the hall, barely enough to detect. There was enough, however, for us to see it as it entered the doorway, or rather, for us to see its outline. It was like a shadow, all dark, and its form largely filled the space from side to side and top to bottom. All of a sudden, a wave of stench wafted over us, so putrid I almost gagged. It smelled like rotted meat packed with maggots, like old and insistent decay, like my granny's storm cellar, only 1,000 times worse. Gail had started praying again. I tried to remove my arm from her grasp, maybe because I thought I needed it to defend myself or something, but she wasn't inclined to let me have it. We heard the low growl again, and the stench in the room got worse. All of a sudden, Diane bolted up and into the bathroom, a Jack and Jill bathroom leading to another bedroom, and the entity disappeared from the doorway. Before I'd even managed to wrap my arms around what Diane had done, Gail shot up as well and headed for the door the entity had just vacated, probably because I was thoroughly petrified and had lost the ability to think clearly. I followed after Gail. It was almost too dark to see, but I heard Gail head down the stairs. I chased after her. I thought I saw Buster lying on the floor over by the fireplace, but I didn't even consider stopping to check on him. Gail flew out the front door, screaming and crying by then, and I kept following after her. She leapt over the porch steps all the way to the ground and kept running. I tried to do the same, but managed to trip when I landed and crash hard into the ground. I could still hear Gail screaming as she ran away from me, farther and farther away as I struggled to my feet. only to discover I'd sprained my ankle. The pain was excruciating, and I fell right back down. And then I heard another scream, but it wasn't coming from Gail. It was coming from inside the house, from Diane. It was shrill and sharp. Then there was a choking sound. And then there was quiet. Oh my God. I scrambled back to my feet and started to limp along best I could, chasing after Gail, but she was already gone. Not only could I no longer hear her, but I couldn't see her anymore either. She had disappeared into the darkness, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to find her. I knew that I was alone, and I knew that whatever that thing in the house was, it was coming. I couldn't move fast enough to escape. I knew that too, so I made a sharp left and headed into the woods. Just then, I heard something walk out onto the front porch, something heavy sounding, so I dove down into a little stand of bushes and tried to be as quiet as I possibly could. I was terrified. It was like everything I'd always known about the world had gotten turned on its head. Monsters were real, weren't they? It wasn't like I'd come to believe at all that they were just stories people made up to scare each other. They were real. Whatever was on the porch began to look my way. At least it seemed like it did to me. I just closed my eyes and tried to lie perfectly still. I was praying inside my head, but I didn't make a sound. Just then I heard a car turn into the driveway, its headlights flooding the yard and then the front porch. To my shock, to my amazed relief, I saw that the thing on the front porch, the thing I'd been so terrified of, was in fact Diane. Seemingly in a daze, she found her way down the front steps and waited as the car pulled up right in front of her. It was her parents, home from the movies. Thank God. I scrambled out from underneath the bushes and limped my way to the front of the car, to where Diane's parents were examining her. I was still frightened out of my wits, mind you, thinking that there was a demon named Corson somewhere in the house, and that we were all in mortal danger. But there was something about being in the presence of grown-ups that always made things better. They could handle it. They could fix it. It took me a moment to see why Diane's parents seemed so concerned, though. Why they kept looking at her and asking her questions. Diane's neck was bruised all the way around, reddish and turning blue. It was like someone had choked her hard, like they'd meant to do her real harm. I shuddered to think what had gone on in the house once me and Gail had run out the front door. Things got a little sketchy for me from there. As far as Diane's parents were concerned, Casey was missing, Gail was missing. I'd been hiding in the woods, and Diane looked as if she'd been choked half to death. The police came, and that's when they found Buster. He was lying by the fireplace where I'd seen him, and he was dead. They ultimately decided that he'd stumbled down the stairs and broke his back. Of course, that didn't explain how he'd gotten all the way across the room from the base of the stairs to the fireplace. But I guess they had bigger fish to fry. The police found Casey. She was lying in a drainage ditch out by the road, unconscious and badly bruised. They speculated that she might have gotten hit by a passing car, maybe by someone who hadn't even known they'd hit her, because they never did find the culprit. Fortunately, though, her injuries weren't life-threatening, but she did have to stay in the hospital for a while. They didn't find Gail until early the next morning. She was sitting in the front pew of the Catholic church, naked as a jaybird. After a number of interviews by people in the psychology world, they determined she was badly traumatized, to the point of having broken from reality just a little. Her family decided to send her to a convent to convalesce. I didn't understand that at all, but it wasn't for me to say. My dad is an atheist, so I pretty much know how he was going to react to all of this. If he didn't believe in God, it was unlikely he believed in demons. He was concerned, though, just like everybody else. I do think he thought there might have been a reason other than my imagination I told him the story I told. I'm pretty sure all the grown-ups believed we'd gotten hold of some bad dope, but I know that's to be untrue. Because of Diane's and Casey's injuries, though, They drug tested all of us. As it turns out, Diane and Casey had been smoking pot before me and Gail showed up that evening. I'm pretty sure that hadn't had anything to do with what had gone on, but in the end it made us all sound less than credible. So, because they found drugs in her system, nobody really believed what Casey had said about the events of that evening. As for Diane, she conveniently developed a case of amnesia. Couldn't remember a thing from the time Casey had gotten there until her parents came home and found her on the porch. I don't believe her, though. I think she remembers everything, just like I do. For whatever reason, she just doesn't want to face it. I guess I can understand that, but as for me, I can't forget. I know in my heart that something abnormal went on that night, and it scares me to death to think that it could happen again. I had to talk to the police a lot. I must have talked to them a dozen times in the weeks after, and I almost told them the exact same story. I knew I always told them the same story because I always told them the truth. Curiously, though, they never found the book. We had all told them about it, but they never found it, or at least not that they admitted to. It could have been that one of them was a less-than-honest book aficionado, and he decided to add it to his collection. I don't really care. As long as I never have to see it again, that's fine with me. Finally, though, the police stopped coming around, and things started moving back towards normal. But they never would be the same, would they? I mean, how could they? My therapist doesn't think it's strange for me to believe the story I keep telling, but just like the police, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'd seen what I'd seen, and I'd heard what I'd heard. Maybe we'd been a part of something we weren't intended to. Maybe that's why the book disappeared. Obviously, there are things in this world beyond my ability to understand. All I know for sure is that I'll never go out to Diane's house again, and for the foreseeable future, I'll be sleeping with the light on.
I was around 13 years old, and at the shopping center with my parents. I wanted to go off on my own for a while, and wander around by myself, and my parents agreed. After a little while, I stopped by a woman in casual clothes. She told me that she was an undercover cop, and I was suspected of shoplifting. Because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for ID or anything like that. I didn't know I could question authority. She asked me to look through my bag, and I let her, insisting that I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was, who I was there with. Then she asked me something that still sends a chill down my spine. Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight? I told them of course they were. Why wouldn't they be? She then insisted that I had to follow her to go figure out the shoplifting thing. I went. She was leading me towards the exit. By the grace of God, before we got there, we bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on, and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone, and says things like, "Oh, this isn't the right girl?" Then hangs up and says, "Sorry, wrong person," and abruptly walks off. My dad stood there dumbfounded. When my mom found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way the undercover cop handled the situation. She took me to management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by the undercover cop. And the woman answered with, "We don't employ undercover cops." I have no idea what this woman planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars, even to this day, that I ran into my dad. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we had gotten into a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember now what it was about, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything for the whole next day. So, this afternoon I was laying in bed, getting work done. It was a Tuesday, and I'm pretty sure his last class finishes at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he should be home around 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lay in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working. But I could hear heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been in mid-fight, and if I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed that it was strange how slow the footsteps were, and how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and didn't think about it. I was just laying there, waiting and waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting 24 hours, huh?" smile. But the door didn't open more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds, while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could it have been his mom, his sister, the landlady? For some reason I concluded that it was surely the mom or sister, so I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of woman's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sisters don't have keys and had never came over before. The landlady never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There's a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up and I asked him if his mom or sister might have came over, unannounced. "No, don't move. I'm calling the police." The police were there in a few minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was in there at this point. It was weird though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite keeping a jar full of money right next to the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight into the bedroom, saw my legs on the bed, panicked, and just left. You can't open the big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced that it was a landlady being nosy, and I began to feel a little better. Nevertheless, we demanded the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment apart looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment but doesn't touch or take anything valuable, not even the jar of money sitting right next to the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight into the bedroom, sees someone on the bed and leaves immediately. I never got to meet this person who opened the door that day, and I hope I never do. I once met up with an old friend of mine, male, 22. A friend I had known for a few years prior to the meetup, in November of 2017. I actually met this person on a dating site. However, as time went on, the relationship between us became strictly platonic. There were no red flags. My gut did not warn me, so I completely trusted this person. We met up in town, behind a bus station, on a greasy hill surrounded by trees and a tall wall. Our meeting was just to have a smoke, get a little high, and to have a small catch-up. The meetup was fine. I had actually started smoking weed a few months before, so I was still relatively new to it. He had brought something new for me to try, purple haze. I wasn't at all anxious about trying it, as I completely trusted this person, and would have never believed that he would lie to me. He packed a full blunt for me, but I only managed to smoke about a quarter of the blunt. We spoke during this time about work, our previous relationships, and random stuff. About a half an hour later, I start feeling extremely lightheaded and anxious. I suddenly had this strange feeling where I did not feel comfortable at all and really wanted to go home. When I asked him if I could go home, he offered to take me, but I said, "No, it's okay." He offered again, "Please let me take you home. You'd be safe with me. I won't hurt you." I shook my head and said, "No, thank you. I can take myself home." When I started to walk away, I felt like I was walking on a cloud. My head became dizzy and my eyesight was a little blurry. I had never felt like this before, and in time, I started to panic. When we made our way down the hill towards the bus station, I was relieved, as there were a lot of people around, so if anything happened, someone would step in. I became extremely terrified of him. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that told me to get away from him when I got to the bus station. I told him that I could call a taxi and go home. His tone was no longer nice, but very stern. "I'm going to take you home now," and began to pull on my jacket. I told him no, and that I was going to go home on my own. Pulled my jacket harder, and I fell against him. He pulled me into him and told me that I don't need to be scared of him, but I was so terrified. At this point, I started to feel very paranoid, and I couldn't see properly. I pushed him away from me and rubbed my eyes. He tried to pull my phone from me and yelled in my face, "Do you ever listen? I'm taking you home." I noticed a few people had stopped and asked if I was okay. All I remember is I wanted to go home, so a lady kindly called a taxi for me and waited with me, made sure I was okay, and helped me into the taxi. During the time when I waited for the taxi, he kept trying to get me to come into his car, but the lady that looked after me told him to go home and that she was going to take me home instead, so he left. When I got home, I gave the taxi driver my money and told him to keep the change. I didn't want to wait around. I just wanted to get into my bed because at this time, it's the only place I would feel safe from harm. That evening, I laid in my bed for 5 hours straight, staring at the ceiling. I don't remember if I thought about anything or if my mom came in at any time. I just remember laying in bed, doing nothing until the paranoia and the sickly feeling began to wear off. I remember looking at my phone and seeing 32 missed calls from him, 10 voicemails, and 50 plus messages. The messages were weird. He had sent around 20 messages just asking where I was and when I got home. And in one of the voicemails, he told me how he had a fantasy of taking me home whilst drugged up and tying me up. He wanted to blindfold me, and he wanted me to submit myself to him. I freaked out and blocked him on all social medias, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, and blocked his phone number. Before blocking him, I told him if he ever contacted me again, I would call the police. I heard nothing from him for a month until I received a text from an unknown number, asking me how I was. I hadn't given my number to anyone, so I just ignored it. I then received another message a few minutes later saying they missed me and that they would see me soon. I asked who they were. No reply. Nothing. So creepy person who pretended to be my friend, let's never meet again. If you haven't seen my other stories I've posted on here, I'll give you the same background. I am and have been a paramedic for about 10 years. My entire career has been spent in emergency medicine, responding to 911 calls, and providing advanced life support for life-threatening illnesses and injuries. The calls we respond to range from inappropriate use of an ambulance to minutes away from death, and oftentimes, it's already too late. If you've read my other stories on here, you know about my background. But in 2014, I moved to another city, hours away from home, to work. The city was smallish, less than 100K people, but the ambulance serviced the entire county where the city resides. We worked 24-hour shifts, which weren't too bad. The days usually were somewhat busy, and at nights, the ambulance station had rooms with twin beds that allowed you to get some fairly decent sleep at night. Most of the calls that would classify as crazy, creepy, or scary always tend to come at night. The day that the story takes place is a little different than normal. Normally I get an EMT basic partner, which means Since I am an advanced provider on the truck, I get all the patients. But today, I had another paramedic partner because we were training a new hire paramedic. It was her first day of field training orientation. This means we generally let her take the calls and sit back and evaluate her performance to ensure she's capable and doesn't kill anyone. This was her first day after graduation, so she was still pretty green. I could see that she was very nervous and trying very hard to do her best. So as per usual, the day was pretty busy, but as it began to wind down, I was getting ready to attempt to take a nap. I kicked off my boots and laid down on my bed, on top of the covers, easier to get up and going in case a call comes in. I put the radio up by my head, full volume like I always do, so I could be sure to wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, midnight starts to roll around and I hear a call go out. Dispatcher says, "Man who has been stabbed is not breathing." Luckily, it's not my call, and another ambulance responds, so I go back to bed, or try to. About 30 minutes later, another call goes out, and this time it's for me. Dispatcher information. Man with a knife wound on his hands. Police are on scene. I get my boots on, wake up the new girl and my partner, and walk out to the ambulance. The area of the call was right smack dab in the middle of downtown. We responded non-emergent, as it was a non-life-threatening injury. As we arrive on the scene, there's probably around 6 police cars, all with their lights on. The area itself was through an alleyway behind a building just off the main street. As we pull up, there's a number of officers, a couple of sheriff deputies, and a detective all standing around this man with rags on his hands. As I get closer, I can see this man was bald, middle-aged, and almost had a homeless look to him. He also had a big dark spot in the middle of his forehead. One of the officers approached me to fill me in what was going on before I talked to the guy and started to treat him. The officer tells me the man has large lacerations on the back of his hands that he received from a knife. At this point, I was still a bit groggy and didn't put 2 and 2 together. The officer says the man said that he was attacked by another man and that he's probably going to need some stitches. So as it is not serious, I have my FTO approach, first to begin her assessment and to give her a treatment plan. I stay close behind her and we both walk up to the man who was in handcuffs. As we approach, the dark spot on the guy's forehead is now clear. On the center of his forehead, stretching from his eyebrows and what would have been his hairline, is the biggest swastika tattoo I have ever seen. My FTO begins to talk to the man. I sit back and observe. Something about this man's general composure and responses chilled me. When we first walked up to this man, he was muttering something underneath his breath. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but he was repeating it over and over. My FTO asked the police to uncuff him, to see the cut on his hand more clearly. At this point, one of the officers produced the knife he believes to be the weapon that caused the injury. The knife was in an evidence baggie, and it was covered in blood. It was nothing special, just looked like a cheap plastic pocket knife, like you would buy at some cheesy gift shop. It was a folding knife with a plastic blade handle, and the blade was maybe 3 inches long, with a bit of serration towards the handle. The man showed us his hands. On the back, cutting right through another swastika tattoo, was a laceration that went from the base of his pinky finger to the lower fleshy part of his thumb. It was quite wide also, approximately 3 centimeters, exposing the bone as well as some tendons. The bleeding was mostly stopped with pressure from the towel that he was holding on to. When my partner asked the man what happened, the man then repeated to us what he had been muttering to himself. "I killed him, man. He's dead, man. I had to have killed him. He's gotta be dead." At this point, I'm starting to put it together and understanding the larger picture. We get the man into the ambulance so we can assess for any more injuries that may not be visible underneath his clothing. After a thorough search, we realize that there's no more injuries, so we begin to transport him to the hospital. My FTO bandaged the man's hand, and we were driving, and I start asking questions trying to figure out the details. The man told me everything I wanted to know, and never lost that chilling vibe, staring distantly as he recounted what happened. The man told me that he is homeless and was wandering around when a friend offered him a ride. He says that he was leery of this man, but decided to get in anyway and accept the offer. The man said the friend began asking him if he hated black people. The man said he didn't, and that he wasn't racist. He tells me this is when his friend became upset with him and tried to stab him with a pocket knife. The man attempted to defend himself, managed to wrestle the knife away from his friend, and stabbed him in the back before jumping out of the car and running. So with the shocking telling of the tale, we continued to transport the man in silence. Also a side note, an officer rode in the ambulance with us the whole way. After we dropped him off at the ER, we all kind of sat there shocked, leaving the hospital. We returned to the station and tried to get some sleep. However, we were not destined for sleep that night. An hour later, we get another call for a body removal from downtown, less than 3 blocks away from our last call. We pull up to the area, which is in the middle of the street. The street itself is blocked off 100 feet on both sides by a fire truck and police cars. The fire truck was equipped with a double stack of 4 halogen lights, risen up on a ladder, shining down to illuminate the area. Walking up with a stretcher and a body bag, the detective on scene tells us that they are done with the investigation and they are ready for us to take the body to the medical examiner's office. At this point, we are still 50 feet away from where the body lay. From where we are, I can see the person laying in the middle of the street. We get closer and take a few minutes to examine the body. What I see and putting together what I was told is astonishing to say the least. Another middle-aged man, appears white, possibly Mexican, lays in the middle of the street on his back with his arms spread eagle and his legs straight. There's a vehicle parked on the side of the road with the driver door still open. I figured this must be the guy's vehicle. It was parked neatly, not haphazardly or incorrectly. The deceased man has streaks of blood coming out of his nose and mouth, with several small puncture wounds on his face and cheeks. Looking at his torso, there was about a dozen or more knife-shaped puncture wounds in his chest and abdomen. Most of the wounds were so jagged and barbaric looking, you could see the fat tissue pushing out of them. There wasn't much blood puddled around the man, but there was a very large trail of blood from the man to the side of the street where the curb is. The blood then continues to flow another 10 feet along the curb before spilling into the storm drain. Without much blood, the man bled out in the middle of the streets. We packaged the man into a body bag and transported him to the ME's office. When we get back to the station, my charge medic told me that the officer that rode with the first patient requested that we fill out a report on what we heard the man say. Thankfully, the rest of the shift was uneventful. Fast forward to a couple years ago, I received a call from the state's attorney. He asked if I remembered the call, to which I informed him that I do. He told me that this person is going on trial for murder, is pleading not guilty, and would like to go over my statement with me, as I would be a key witness and require my testimony in court. We went over my statement and talked about it a bit, then told me that he would be in touch and wished me a good day. A few days later, he calls me up again and informs me that the man changed his plea to self-defense and that I was needed in court a week later. Literally one day before the trial, he calls me up again. He tells me that this time the man has changed his plea to guilty and I was no longer needed. I don't know what happened after that. I never really looked into it. It's just another brick on the wall, so to speak. A story filed away in my brain, probably never to be forgotten. This happened a couple months ago. It feels hollow to put a catchy title on what happened to me because it freaked me the fuck out for a while. I was driving home from work at 2 a.m. I'm a nurse and live in a small city. The roads were totally deserted and it was a freezing night. I don't live far from work, maybe a couple of miles. I'm driving down a residential street around the corner from my house and I see a man laying face down in the street. Now remember, I'm a nurse. My first thought was, great, gotta help this guy up. I was coming off of a long shift, and falls happen all the time. As I slowed down the car, I suddenly realized what an idiot move this was. I'm a 100-pound woman and I don't carry any weapons. I thought I should do something to help this guy, so I called 911 and drove past him and slowed to a stop at the end of the block. While I stopped at the light, I explained to the dispatcher that there was a man in the road that might need assistance. All of a sudden I hear a loud bang from the driver's side window. I screamed and looked over. A man was pounding on my window, jiggling the handle of my locked car. I looked in my rearview mirror and there was no man laying in the street. Still on the phone with 911, I screamed, "I'm so scared," to the dispatcher, and I floored it through the red light. I quickly told him what had happened, and even though I was right by my house, he told me to keep driving. After a few minutes I calmed down, and he told me to loop back around. I pulled over down the road from my house and stayed in the car. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I got off the phone with the dispatcher, who told me he was sending the police car to cruise the area. As I gathered my things, I do a final scan of the area, and I see the man. He's walking with two other men. I hunched all the way down to my car until they were far down the road, and then bolted into my house. I don't know if he had ill intent, but it freaks the hell out of me that he wasn't alone. Always lock your car doors, and carry mace. A little backstory. When I was 19, I lived with my mom in a ranch-style house on a road that backed up to a large field. On the other side was the main highway. About half a mile down from me was a loony farmer, and about a mile on the other side of me was pretty much a crack house. I guess someone used to live there, but it was run down. I will say that the crackheads were pretty quiet. Other than those two houses, we were isolated. At the time, I was working full-time and going to school full-time. One of my classes ends at 10:30 p.m., and I often wouldn't get home on the day of the week until about 11:15ish. I was driving home one night, and I noticed a guy walking down the road. He had a yellow shirt on and track pants. I remember this outfit because it looked so stupid. It wasn't weird to see people walking down that road because of the whole crack house thing, but I instinctively looked over at him as I drove past. He turned and smiled and waved, which freaked me the fuck out. So I sped half a mile home and pulled into my driveway, weirded out. I get inside and make sure all the doors and windows were secure, and then sat on the couch to be a paranoid freak and wait to make sure the dude walked past my house. Except he didn't. And there was another guy with him, dressed in darker clothes. They actually walked up my driveway and started playing around with my car, testing the handle and stuff. I was in a hurry and forgot to grab my phone from my car, so I was kind of worried that that's what they were after, until the guy in yellow started to approach my door. I'm freaking out, so I go and wake up my mom. She's out of it, and I'm trying to explain the situation when I hear the doorknob turn very slowly. Good thing it was deadbolted. She got out of bed, walked to the door, and then the yellow shirt guy knocked. I perched up on the couch so I could get a good look at him and his friend, still in the driveway. The porch light was on because of the sensor. "Yeah?" my mom said. "You dropped your wallet." I told my mom I had my wallet. It was in my purse. So she calmly told him that she had her wallet and it was too late to be knocking on people's door. I remember perfectly what he said next, even though it was about 6 years ago. "Okay, I'm not a bad guy, just so you know." We were all pretty still. No one moved, not even the guy at the door. Not even when the porch light went off. He tried the handle again. My mom told me to call the cops so she could go get the gun, and I told her I didn't have my phone. So she walked into the kitchen to grab hers off the charger. She handed me her phone and walked into the bathroom. She stared out the window in the backyard. Then she went into her room to grab the Ruger. I was talking to the cops and explaining the situation while watching the guys, explaining that there was 2 suspicious guys at our door when my mom came back out and said, "One in our backyard too," which explained why she looked out the bathroom window. She caught a glimpse of him from the kitchen and wanted to get a more discreet look. My mom walked back over to the door with her gun and said loudly, "If he tries to handle again, I'm gonna open the door and shoot him." Who knows why she said this instead of waiting for the cops to arrive. But the guys took off down the road. I told her this, and she rushed into the bathroom, where the guy apparently in the backyard saw his friends running down the road and sprinted off too. They were going into the direction of the crack house. The cops searched our house and their yard, and then went to the drug house. They found 5 dudes hanging around. One was a yellow shirt guy, and I'm assuming his friends were with him. They did get arrested, and nothing weird like this happened again. But I was on edge for a while. I still make sure the doors are locked at all times of day, even though I live in a much nicer area now. Anyway, sorry it was a bit anticlimactic. The dudes got caught. Weird guys who told me that you found my wallet. Let's not meet. Hey everyone, first time poster here. I totally forgot about this story until recently, so enjoy. At the time, I had just turned 17 and was still pretty naive. I lived in England, so it's legal to work at a bar and serve alcohol as long as you were supervised, but not to drink alcohol. Not that it stopped me. I worked in a working men's club filled with middle-aged people. Most were really nice. I sold bingo tickets twice a week for my dad's cousin, and I was pretty good at it. It's not typical to get tips, but I earned more in tips than I did on my actual wage. On Saturday, my dad would come over with me to have a drink with my elder sister while they played competitive darts in the main bar overlooking my booth. This one particular night, there was this middle-aged, average-looking guy, a little on the plump side, but generally unnoticeable. On the first round of selling tickets, he was at the fruit machine opposite the entire time, looking over at me occasionally. The second round he approached me, asking me what I was selling and how bingo worked. Clearly had never played before, but hey, everyone starts somewhere, right? He bought some tickets and offered to buy me a drink. I declined and informed him I was underage. By now, I had a bit of an uneasy vibe and didn't want to take a drink from a guy I didn't know. He offered me a cola, complimenting me a little too hard. Again, I declined and went on my way to help with a game in the main hall, which was part of my job. The third time, he stood against the wall adjacent to me and just watched me work. He waited until the queue calmed down and bragged about how much money he had and how he wants to be my sugar daddy, how cute I am, commenting on my figure, my boobs, my butt, etc. I was trapped in my booth. I was late into the main hall, so the concert chairman, which is the guy that calls the bingo numbers and gives out the winnings, comes out and asks what's going on. This guy claims that we are just talking. I apologized to the chairman, and he walked me into the hall. He said that he could tell that I was freaked out, so I told him everything. He made the bar staff aware, who also made my boss, which is my cousin's dad, aware as well. The last round of selling tickets, he doesn't even wait for me to get back to my booth. He grabs my ass, telling me that he wants to be my sugar daddy once again. Tries to push me up against the wall, and is suddenly spun around. Not just by my dad, but my boss and numerous staff members and customers who saw and heard what went down. He started to argue his innocence until my dad, not so politely, introduced himself. He then knew he was fucked. My dad punches him in the nose, blood running down his face. Everyone picked him up like a plank of wood and threw him out the closed door. Never saw him after that. Everyone checked up on me to make sure I was okay. My sister covered the rest of my shift, and I was bought so many drinks. So creepy guy that wanted to be my sugar daddy, let's not meet again.